There's a monument on a hilltop in Korea. It's 30 miles south of Seoul, looking down over an old valley town called Osan. Folks walk past it, and they don't think much of it. But that little stretch of ground is where a handful of American boys stood in front of an army and bought the rest of us time with their lives. They were there first. First to stand, first to fight, and first to fall. And most people back home have never even heard their story. I aim to fix that today. This is the war they call forgotten. Let's remember it together. Now, to understand what these men did, you've got to understand who they were. The 24th Infantry Division. They were born out of an old Hawaiian Division right after Pearl Harbor. They fought their way through some of the hardest battles of the Southwest Pacific, and when the war was won, they drew occupation duty in Japan. 4 long years helping a beaten enemy get back on its feet. And it was good work, peaceful work. A war had passed. Maybe they let themselves believe all wars had. This was a time for quiet things. But peace was already dying as the summer of 1950 came on. North of the 38th parallel, communism was setting its clock, and a great mass of men and guns stood quiet in the dark, waiting for the order to move. On the 25th of June, that army struck. The North Koreans came across the border in full force. They rolled over the South Korean defenses and threw the whole nation into war. And the free countries of the world, they looked at that, and they did not look away. The United Nations met, and it met fast. They named the aggression for what it was, and they made a decision. This invader would be stopped by force.
Governments may sometimes falter in their support of the United Nations, but the peoples of the world do not falter. The demand of men and women throughout the world for international order and justice is one of the strongest forces in these troubled times. We've just had a vivid demonstration of that fact in Korea.
American planes and warships, they hit back hard, but you can't hold ground from the air. And the invader kept coming, and it became plain as day. Somebody was going to have to stand in front of him on foot. That somebody was the 24th. First to go was a task force, 540 men. That's it. That's the whole number. They were flown into South Korea on the 1st of July, out ahead of everybody, and their orders were about as simple as orders get. Move north, stop them where you find them. So they went north, through villages where the people just stood there, frozen in fear, through towns gone dead quiet, everyone already run off ahead of the invader. And at Osan, that hilltop I showed you in the beginning, with the enemy just hours away and coming fast, they set down their guns and they waited. They were too few to win, and they knew it. But a few men, dug into the right ground, can do one thing. They can make the other fella slow down. For 2 days, on that high ground and the low, the handful held an army back. Now the cost, it was high, but those 2 days they paid for it in blood and let the rest of the division load up in Japan and get across to Korea, while there was still a South Korea to save. The easy days were over now. Every man, every rifle, every truck the 24th had, it all had a new job. They loaded up at record speed out of 5 ports along the coast of Kyushu, and they poured into Korea. And for those first weeks, the story of Osan just kept repeating itself. Stand against an enemy with more of everything, fight for time, then fall back and do it again. On the 12th of July, they drew back to the Goom River line to hold the city called Tejon. It turned into one of the bitterest fights of the whole war, and they were still fighting it all alone. Help? It was on the road. The 25th Division landed at Osan, and the 1st Cavalry came ashore at Pongdong, but Tejon belonged to the 24th. They held every hill above that city, and they fought in the valleys leading up to it, and when there was nothing left to give, they fought in the streets of Tejon itself. 2 days straight out of hell, ammunition running low, enemy artillery turned the whole place into a furnace. And in the middle of those burning streets was their commander, General Dean. He was moving from man to man, giving heart to the boys who had none left, picking up a weapon and fighting right beside them. After that battle, General Dean was taken prisoner, and it would be a long, long time before his division ever laid eyes on him again. On the 21st of July, the 24th pulled out of Tejon. They had fought the last of their lonely delay actions. They had fought for time, and by God, they had won it. But there was no cheering, because behind them, the city they bled for lay in smoke and ruin. There's a river that runs down the length of Korea, the Naktong. It's wide, deep, and it's old. And in the summer of 1950, it became the last wall, the western edge of the 8th Army's final stand around the port of Osan. The 24th fell back to the river, and they dug in. And for the first time in this whole war, they had a piece of ground they could actually defend. The enemy, they had been bragging they'd shoved the whole United Nations force right into the sea. All through the first weeks of August, he came at that line, again and again, to make good on it, and the line held. It held, and while it held, behind its port in Osan, it filled up. Troops, trucks, guns, everything a real army needs to turn a war around. By the middle of August, that line was secure. By the 25th, the men of the 24th had been in combat 55 days without a single break. Yeah, that's right, 55. They were finally pulled off the line by a fresh outfit, the 2nd Division, and they got to rest. Just the plain, simple things for just a little while, because they earned every minute of it, because the tide, it was about to turn. Far behind the enemy lines on the west coast of a port called Incheon, General MacArthur, he threw a punch nobody saw coming, an amphibious landing, 150 miles behind the front. The Marines and the 7th Infantry Division stormed ashore 50 miles behind the front. And just like that, the invaders was cut off from his supplies and caught in a giant pincer. Air Force, Navy, and Marines, planes overhead, choking off anything that tried to reach him. And the second that hook landed, the whole 8th Army, the 24th right with them, broke out of the Osan perimeter and drove north. They crossed Naktong every way a man could cross a river, and they pushed up past all those familiar places, including Tejon, the city of their worst day, and they took it back. For the men of the 24th, that was a different kind of victory. That one was personal. Then came the capital, exactly 3 months to the day after Seoul fell to the communists. And the UN, they took it back. But the Reds had turned the buildings into forts, and a Red tank could come around just about any corner. So this thing was house to house, room to room, under fire the whole way. They'd hoped to spare the city, but there was no sparing it. On the 26th, MacArthur announced Seoul was recaptured, and the main enemy garrison broke and ran north. Behind the fighting came the machine. At Kimpo Airfield, planes were touching down once every 10 minutes. The 180th Airborne came in straight from the United States. They flew a whole bridge, a 280-ton bridge, into that country, piece by air. And the same planes that carried the men carried the wounded out. In the first 4 days alone, they flew better than 300 wounded men back to Japan. And then there's a part of this I'm not going to dress up, because you shouldn't let anybody dress it up for you. As our troops freed that territory, they started finding graves. When they finished counting, the estimate was around 25,000 South Korean men women and children, and captured American soldiers among them, murdered by the Reds as they pulled back. Clubbed, burned, shot. The biggest grave of all was Tejan with 6,000 souls in it. They photographed all of it, every bit, because one day it was going to be evidence. That's what these men were fighting against. Don't you ever forget it. And they continued to drive north. By the middle of October the 24th, they crossed the 38th parallel, and on the 17th, the 1st Cavalry pushed into Pyongyang itself, the enemy's capital. Everybody braced for a death stand. Word was 30,000 Reds were dug in to hold it. Then, a strange thing happened. The fire, it just slacked off. The enemy was pulling out, coming apart at the seams. The capital of Korean communism fell under the United Nations flag, and its government just vanished north across the Manchurian border. To slam the door, the 187th Airborne, they jumped again, north of Pyongyang at Sukchang and Suncheon on the 20th and 21st, dropping right in front of the fleeing enemy to cut off their escape. Better than 4,000 men out of the sky, with guns and vehicles floating down under parachutes behind him. MacArthur, he watched it from his own plane, and he said, "This closes the trap on the enemy." What was left of the Red Army was squeezed down to within 50 miles of the border. And here's one you keep in your heart. A man named Al Jolson, the first big star to come all the way to Korea, got up in front of the GIs and gave them everything he had. He was 64 years old, on his last tour, and his doctors had told him, don't even go. 6 days after this performance, Al Jolson died. One of the last things a man did in Korea was raise a United Nations flag. By the end of November, the 24th had pushed clean up the whole west coast of North Korea to within 17 miles of the Yalu. That's the river that splits Korea from the Red China Manchuria, 17 miles from the end of the whole thing. They ate the Thanksgiving dinner that year up in the snows of the North Korean mountains. And you know what? It was a great Thanksgiving. Victory was right there. A man could believe he'd be home by Christmas, and that hope felt more real than the cold biting through his coat. Even MacArthur said it was plain. This war was definitely coming to an end. But across that river, out in the vastness of the Manchuria, something was waiting. 2 field armies, powerful and fully equipped. A brand new enemy the men at the Yalu couldn't see yet. It was Communist China. That's where we'll pick up next time. All right, I'm Sam. Thanks for remembering them, and thank you for remembering the 24th with me.